There is a peculiar architecture to how our lives are rebuilt. And if you've been alive long enough, you've likely felt the blueprints being redrawn while you were still living inside the structure. You don't see the new walls going up. You don't hear the hammering. But you feel the space shifting around you. And suddenly, the room you've comfortably inhabited for years starts to feel like it was built for someone you no longer are. The biggest movements in a human life never announce themselves with trumpets. They arrive like a change in the barometric pressure of your soul. You can't explain it, but you can feel it in your bones. Something is different. Something is coming. And the strangest truth is this: before anything external rearranges itself, something internal has already been under construction for a long time. We are taught to look for blessings as if they are packages dropped from the sky. But the real preparation happens in the dark, in the discomfort, in the moments when you feel most unsettled for no apparent reason. Carl Jung, the architect of modern depth psychology, spent his life mapping this underground territory. He understood that the psyche sends out signals long before the conscious mind is ready to decode them. And in the language of the soul, these signals are not warnings. They are invitations. They are the universe, or God, or the deep self, whatever language you prefer, whispering that the ground beneath you is about to shift. But here is what makes this phase so disorienting. The signals never look like what you are expecting. You pray for peace, and you get restlessness. You ask for clarity, and you get confusion. You beg for doors to open, and the ones you were leaning on slam shut. And in that moment, it is very easy to believe you are moving backward. But what if you are not? What if the discomfort is not a detour, but the actual path? What if the pressure you feel right now is not punishment, but preparation? In the next 30 minutes, we are going to walk through the invisible stages that almost every human soul passes through when it is being repositioned for something it cannot yet see. These are not theories. These are the patterns etched into the oldest stories, the deepest psychology, and the quietest moments of your own life. If you are watching this, and something inside you feels restless, heavy, or strangely expectant, stay with me. You may be closer than you think to the life you've been asking for. Section 1. The Wait Before the Wings. Let's start with the part nobody prepares you for. The part that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own direction. You are doing everything right. You are showing up. You are trying to improve. You are praying, or meditating, or affirming, or whatever framework you use to stay connected to something larger than yourself. And yet, instead of things getting lighter, they get heavier. Instead of roads opening, they close. Instead of feeling closer to your breakthrough, you feel like you are sinking deeper into quicksand. This is the first paradox of any major transition, and it is almost always misinterpreted. Think about the last time you genuinely tried to change something significant about your life. Maybe you decided to get healthier. For the first week, your body ached, your muscles screamed. You felt worse than when you were doing nothing. Why? Because growth tears down before it builds up. The same principle applies to the soul. When you are being prepared for a larger life, the first thing that happens is not expansion, it is contraction. The old structures have to become uncomfortable so you will stop leaning on them. Carl Jung observed this phenomenon in virtually every patient he worked with, who was undergoing genuine psychological growth. He called it the night sea journey, the period where the ego, the part of you that thinks it knows how to navigate, is plunged into darkness so that a deeper intelligence can take the helm. There is a reason why, in virtually every ancient tradition, the hero's journey begins not with the victory, but with the departure from comfort. The hero doesn't leave because everything is great. The hero leaves because the familiar world no longer fits. And that discomfort, that pressure, is the first sign that something larger is trying to be born through you. The pressure you feel right now is not arbitrary. It is specific. It is calibrated exactly to the size of the life you are being asked to hold. If you were being prepared for something small, the pressure would be small. But if the pressure feels overwhelming, if it feels like it is pushing you past your limits, that is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that the container of your soul is being expanded. I want you to imagine a piece of metal. In its raw state, it is useful for almost nothing. It cannot hold an edge, it cannot bear weight, it cannot be shaped into anything. But when it is placed into the fire, heated until it glows, and then hammered repeatedly, it screams. On a molecular level, it resists. But the blacksmith knows something the metal does not. The heat and the hammer are not destroying it. They are reorganizing it. They are aligning its internal structure so it can become something it could never become on its own. This is what is happening to you. The fire is not punishment. The hammer is not your enemy. They are the tools of transformation. Now, let's look at a human example that might feel uncomfortably familiar. Consider the story of a man named David. Not the biblical one, but a modern one I encountered in my own work. David was a mid-level manager at a tech company. He was competent, reliable, and invisible. He had been there for 12 years. He prayed for more, he visualized more, he worked hard, but nothing changed. Then, in the span of 6 months, everything fell apart. His department was restructured. His role was eliminated. His wife of 15 years told him she wanted a divorce. His father, with whom he had a complicated relationship, was diagnosed with a terminal illness. From the outside, it looked like his life was being demolished. And for the first few months, David believed that too. He was angry at God, at the universe, at himself. He assumed he was being punished for something he couldn't name. But here is what David discovered in the wreckage. For 12 years, he had been living a life that was too small for him. He knew it, but he was too comfortable to leave. He had outgrown his job, his marriage, and his own self-concept years ago. But there was no pressure to change. The structure was stable, even if it was suffocating. The collapse was not the tragedy. The collapse was the rescue. It forced him to stop leaning on walls that were already crumbling. It forced him to look at the parts of himself he had been avoiding. It forced him to ask the question he had been too afraid to ask. Who am I when everything I built is gone? Jung had a phrase for this. He said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." And what he meant was that every strength we develop, every comfortable identity we build, is constructed on top of something we have repressed. The part of us that is afraid, the part that is insecure, the part that doesn't feel worthy. When life puts pressure on us, that shadow material rises. It bubbles up in the form of anxiety, in the form of conflict, in the form of exhaustion. And most people misinterpret this as a sign that they are broken. But Jung saw it differently. He saw the rising of the shadow not as a problem but as an opportunity. The only way to expand the container of the soul is to integrate what has been left in the dark. The pressure you feel is not breaking you. It is surfacing what needs to be healed so you can carry more. So, if you are in a season where everything feels heavier, where small tasks feel monumental, where your emotions are closer to the surface than you would like, stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Start asking, "What is this surfacing in me?" The pressure is not the enemy. It is the diagnostician. It is revealing the fault lines in your foundation so they can be reinforced before the next floor is built. You are not being buried. You are being rooted. And roots only grow in one direction, down, into the dark, into the pressure, into the soil that nobody sees. The weight you feel is the weight of your own expansion. Section 2. The quiet revision of the self. When the pressure has done its initial work, When the old structures have been sufficiently destabilized, something else begins to happen. And this phase is often more confusing than the first one, because it is quieter. The chaos subsides. The external crises might even settle down. But internally, you feel strange. You feel disconnected from things that used to define you. You walk into rooms that once felt like home, and they feel hollow. You have conversations with people you have known for years, and you feel like you are speaking a different language. You try to return to your old routines, your old comforts, your old ways of coping, and they don't work anymore. They feel like clothes that no longer fit. This is not depression, though it can feel like it. This is not apathy. This is the sacred discomfort of outgrowing your own life. Carl Jung described this as the moment when the persona, the mask we wear for the world, begins to crack. The persona is not fake, necessarily. It is the role we play. It is the version of ourselves that we have crafted to fit into our jobs, our relationships, our communities. And for a long time it serves us. But the persona is not the whole self. It is a costume. And when the soul begins to expand, the costume starts to pinch. It feels tight. It feels inauthentic. And you begin to realize, sometimes with great sorrow, that you cannot go back to being the person you were. I worked with a woman named Sarah, a graphic designer who had built a successful freelance business. She was good at what she did. Her clients loved her. Her income was stable. By any external measure, she had arrived. But internally, she was dying. She told me that every time she opened her email to respond to a client, she felt a wave of nausea. Every new project, no matter how well paid, felt like a weight. She started procrastinating, missing deadlines, something she had never done before. She thought she was burned out. She took a vacation. It didn't help. She came back and the nausea was still there. What Sarah was experiencing was not burnout. It was a signal. Her soul was trying to tell her that she had outgrown the container of her career. The work itself wasn't bad, but it was no longer aligned with who she was becoming. She had spent 15 years building an identity as a service provider, as someone who executed other people's visions. And now, something inside her was stirring, asking to create her own. But that asking felt terrifying, because it meant letting go of the known. It meant admitting that the success she had worked so hard for was no longer enough. Jung wrote extensively about this phase. He called it the call of the self. The self, with a capital S, is the totality of who you are, not just the parts you have polished for public consumption. It includes your gifts, your wounds, your potential, your darkness, and your light. And when the self wants to emerge, it does not ask politely. It creates a crisis. It makes the old life feel unbearable so that you will be willing to leave it. This is why so many midlife transitions look like implosions. People leave stable marriages, quit secure jobs, move to new cities, not because they are irrational, but because they are finally listening to a voice they have ignored for decades. The voice is not always loud. In fact, it is rarely loud. It is more like a persistent whisper, a feeling that there must be more than this, a sense that you are not living your real life, a restlessness that no amount of distraction can quiet. And because this voice does not come with instructions, most people try to silence it. They buy something new. They take on a new project. They scroll. They numb. But the voice does not go away. It gets louder in the quiet moments. It speaks in dreams. It speaks in the flash of envy you feel when you see someone else living boldly. It speaks in the strange tears that come when you watch a movie about someone who had the courage to follow their heart. Here is what I want you to understand about this phase. The discomfort you feel with your old life is not a problem to be solved. It is a compass. It is telling you that you are heading in the wrong direction if you are trying to go back. The only way forward is through the discomfort, into the unknown. And the unknown is terrifying to the ego. The ego wants certainty. It wants a plan. It wants a 5-year roadmap. But the self does not work that way. The self works like a plant growing toward the light. It doesn't know exactly where the light is. It just knows which way to lean. If you are in this phase, if you feel like you no longer fit into the life you built, stop trying to squeeze yourself back into the old mold. Stop trying to resurrect relationships that have run their course. Stop trying to find meaning in activities that have gone flat. The flatness is not a failure. It is a graduation. You have learned what that room had to teach you. It is time to look for the door. And the door is not usually marked. It is found by following the discomfort. The things that no longer feel right are pointing you toward the things that will. Section 3. The unexpected opening. Just when you have accepted the discomfort, just when you have stopped fighting the feeling that you are between worlds, something strange and beautiful begins to happen. It does not announce itself as a major event. It arrives in the form of small, almost forgettable moments. A conversation that leads somewhere unexpected. An opportunity that appears from a direction you weren't watching. A piece of information that arrives at the exact moment you needed it. Most people call these coincidences, but if you are paying attention, you start to suspect that coincidence is too small a word for the precision of what is unfolding. Carl Jung coined a term for this phenomenon. He called it synchronicity. And he defined it as a meaningful coincidence that cannot be explained by cause and effect. It is when the inner world and the outer world line up in a way that feels charged with meaning. You think of an old friend you haven't spoken to in years, and 5 minutes later, they text you. You have been wrestling with a question, and you open a book to a random page that contains the answer. You decide to take a small step toward a new direction, and a door opens that you didn't even know existed. Jung believed that synchronicity was not random. He believed it was the language of the unconscious, and perhaps of something even larger, communicating with the conscious mind. When the psyche is in a state of readiness, when it is aligned with its own deep purpose, the outer world begins to reflect that alignment. It is like tuning a radio. When you are on the wrong frequency, you get static. When you are on the right frequency, the signal comes through clear. The signal was always there. You just weren't tuned to receive it. I want to tell you about a man named James. James was an accountant. He was good with numbers, bad with people, or so he told himself. For years, he had felt a quiet pull towards something more creative, but he dismissed it as impractical. He had a family. He had a mortgage. He had responsibilities. The creative thing was a fantasy. Then, one Saturday, his daughter asked him to help her with a school project. She needed to build a model of a historical building. James, who had not made anything with his hands since high school, sat down at the kitchen table with some cardboard and a glue gun, and something woke up. He didn't think about it. He just built. 3 hours passed like 3 minutes. When he finished, his daughter was thrilled. But James was something else. He was alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the model. Not about the model itself, but about the feeling he had while making it. The feeling of being completely absorbed. The feeling of time disappearing. The feeling of using a part of himself that had been dormant. The next day, he went to the art supply store and bought some clay. He had no idea what he was doing. He just started shaping. And as he shaped, he felt something shift. He wasn't an accountant pretending to be creative. He was a creative person who happened to do accounting. This is how synchronicity often works. It doesn't arrive as a thunderbolt. It arrives as a nudge, a small invitation to pay attention. James could have dismissed that Saturday afternoon as a one-off, a break from his real life. But something in him recognized the signal. He started spending his evenings in a small corner of the garage, working with clay. He took a weekend class. He showed his work to no one. He just followed the pull. And then, a year later, A friend saw one of his pieces on a shelf and asked where he bought it. James said he made it. The friend said, "You should meet my cousin. She owns a gallery." That meeting led to an exhibition. That exhibition led to sales. Those sales led to commissions. Within 3 years, James had transitioned out of accounting and into a career as a sculptor. He will tell you, with complete sincerity, that he did not plan any of it. He just followed the breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs were the coincidences. The friend who happened to visit, the cousin who happened to own a gallery, the client who happened to be looking for exactly the style he was developing. But were they coincidences? Or was his soul finally aligned with his life, broadcasting a signal that the world could now receive? This is the phase where grace becomes tangible. Not grace as a religious concept, but grace as a felt experience. The sense that you are being helped, that things are conspiring in your favor, that you don't have to force and push and struggle the way you used to. When you are in alignment, life becomes surprisingly cooperative. Doors open without your shoulder behind them. People appear with exactly what you need. Solutions arrive before the problems become crises. If you are experiencing this, if you are noticing an unusual number of meaningful coincidences, do not explain them away. Do not reduce them to luck. Acknowledge them. Thank them. Follow them. Synchronicity is not just a sign that you are on the right path. It is the path itself. It is the universe saying, yes, this way. The more you trust it, the clearer it becomes. The more you follow it, the more it appears. You are not making these things happen. You are simply tuning in to a frequency that has always been broadcasting. And when you are on that frequency, you stop chasing life and start being led by it. Section 4. The intensification before integration. Now, just when you start to feel the grace, just when the coincidences give you hope, something else often arrives, and this something can feel like a betrayal. The attacks intensify. The opposition grows. The criticism, whether from outside or inside, becomes louder. You thought you had turned a corner. You thought the hard part was over. But suddenly, you are facing resistance that feels personal, relentless, and designed to break your spirit. This is not a sign that you made a wrong turn. This is a sign that you are getting close. Think about the physics of pressure. When you are deep underwater, the pressure is immense but stable. The real danger is not at the bottom. It is during the ascent. As you rise, the pressure differential can tear you apart if you rise too fast. The same is true psychologically and spiritually. When you are moving from a lower level of consciousness to a higher one, the contrast between where you have been and where you are going creates friction. The parts of you that are still attached to the old way of being do not go quietly. They fight for survival. Carl Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is not just the dark parts of yourself. It is everything you have repressed, denied, or refused to see. And when you start to expand, the shadow rises to be acknowledged. It rises in the form of old fears. It rises in the form of self-doubt. It rises in the form of external people who seem to mirror your own unresolved issues. If you are feeling attacked, if you are feeling misunderstood, if you are feeling like everyone is against you, pause and ask, what is being mirrored? What is this conflict revealing about the parts of myself I have not yet integrated? I remember a conversation with a woman named Elena. Elena was a healer, a gifted one. She had spent years doing inner work, and she was finally ready to launch her own practice. She found a space, printed business cards, built a website. The week before her grand opening, everything collapsed. Her landlord doubled the rent. Her partner, who had been supportive, suddenly became critical and distant. Her mother, who had a history of undermining her, called with a long list of reasons why she was going to fail. Elena was devastated. She came to me and said, I thought I was doing the right thing. Why is the universe punishing me? I asked her a question that Jung might have asked. I said, Elena, who do these people sound like? She looked confused. I said, the critical voice of your partner, the fearful voice of your mother, the voice of the landlord saying you can't afford this. Where have you heard that voice before? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in my own head. I've been telling myself I can't do this for years. I just finally got quiet enough to stop listening. And now everyone else is saying it. This is the shadow confrontation. The voices outside are often the voices we have refused to acknowledge inside. When you stop attacking yourself, the world may temporarily take up the slack. Not because the world is cruel, but because you are vibrating at a new frequency, and the old frequency will try to pull you back. The people and circumstances that are out of alignment with your growth will become uncomfortable. They will either change, or they will leave, or they will become hostile. It is not personal. It is physics. The key to navigating this phase is not to fight back. It is not to prove them wrong. It is to stay centered. It is to recognize that the intensity of the opposition is proportional to the value of what you are moving toward. No one attacks something that poses no threat. The fact that you are under fire means you are a target worth hitting. And the only way to survive is to keep moving forward. Not faster, not more aggressively, but steadily. With your eyes on the horizon, not on the mud being thrown. Jung had a beautiful way of describing this. He said, the shadow is not the enemy. The shadow is the teacher. What he meant was that the parts of ourselves we have rejected contain the very energy we need to become whole. The criticism that stings the most often contains a grain of truth. The fear that paralyzes you is pointing directly at the area where you need to grow. The people who trigger you are showing you the wounds that still need healing. If you can stop defending and start listening, the attacks become information. They become fuel. Section 5. The fallow field. And then, after the intensity, there is often a sudden and disorienting quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of resolution. The empty quiet of a waiting room. The attacks stop. The coincidences plateau. The intense emotions settle into something that feels like flatness. And this flatness can be more disturbing than the chaos. At least when you were in the fight, you knew you were alive. Now, you feel like you are in suspended animation. Nothing is happening. Nothing is moving. And you start to wonder if you imagined the whole thing. This is the fallow phase, and it is one of the most misunderstood seasons of the soul. In agriculture, a field is left fallow not because it is useless, but because it needs to restore its nutrients. If you plant crop after crop without rest, the soil becomes depleted. It can no longer produce. The fallow period is not a waste of time. It is the soil rebuilding itself in the dark so it can support the next harvest. Jung understood this intuitively. He spent years of his own life in what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. A period after his break with Freud where he felt lost, directionless, and empty. He didn't write. He didn't teach. He played. He built castles out of stones. He drew mandalas. He let his psyche drift. From the outside, it looked like a man having a breakdown. From the inside, it was something else entirely. It was his psyche reorganizing itself. It was the fallow period that would eventually produce some of the most influential psychological ideas of the 20th century. The silence you feel in this phase is not abandonment. It is gestation. It is the period where the seeds that have been planted in the dark are putting down roots. You cannot see them. You cannot feel them. But if you dig, you will find that they are there, reaching down, anchoring themselves for the growth that is coming. The problem is that we have been trained to distrust silence. We have been trained to believe that if nothing is happening, we are doing something wrong. So we try to manufacture movement. We try to force things. We try to make noise to prove we are still alive. But the fallow field does not respond to force. It responds to patience. I want to share something that might help. In many spiritual traditions, this phase is called the dark night of the soul. It is not a punishment. It is a purification. It is the stripping away of everything that is not essential, so that when the light returns, you can recognize it for what it is. When you are in the dark, you learn to trust something other than your eyes. You learn to feel your way forward. You learn to listen for sounds you cannot see. And most importantly, you learn that you are not alone. Even when you feel completely isolated, the dark is not empty. It is full of potential. It is full of the ingredients for the next chapter. They are just not visible yet. If you are in this silence, if you are waiting and nothing seems to be happening, do not despair. Do not force the door. Do not try to manufacture the feeling. Rest in the not knowing. Trust that the soil is doing its work. The silence is not a void. It is a womb, and in that womb, something is taking shape that will eventually be strong enough to live in the light. Section 6. The pull toward integrity. When the silence begins to lift, you will notice something subtle but profound. You will start to feel pulled, not pushed. Pulled toward simplicity. Pulled toward truth. Pulled toward the things that actually matter. The things that used to motivate you, approval, status, comparison, will feel strangely hollow. The things that used to terrify you, being seen, being wrong, being alone, will feel less threatening. Something inside you is settling. Something is coming home. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation. It is the lifelong journey of becoming who you actually are, as opposed to who you were told to be. And it is marked by a shift in motivation. In the first half of life, we are driven by the ego. We want to build, achieve, prove, acquire. And there is nothing wrong with that. It is necessary. But if we do it well, if we let life pressure us and stretch us and break us open, something else begins to emerge in the second half. We start to care less about what the world thinks and more about what is true. We start to value peace over approval. We start to choose depth over breadth. I saw this in a client named Richard. Richard was a lawyer, a very successful one. He had the corner office, the reputation, the salary. And he was miserable. He came to therapy not because he wanted to change careers, but because he wanted to understand why he felt so empty, despite having everything he had worked for. As we talked, it became clear that Richard had spent his entire life building a version of himself that was acceptable to others. He became a lawyer because his father was a lawyer. He joined the firm because it was prestigious. He took the cases that would enhance his reputation, not the ones that interested him. He had never, not once, asked himself what he actually wanted. The work we did together was not about quitting his job. It was about helping him hear his own voice. And over time, that voice became clearer. It said things like, I want to teach, and I want to spend more time with my kids, and I want to take on cases that align with my values, even if they don't pay as well. These were not dramatic changes, but they were tectonic. They shifted the foundation of his life. He didn't leave the law. He just started practicing it differently. He stopped chasing partnership and started mentoring junior associates. He took a pay cut to work on civil rights cases. He started coming home at 6 instead of 9. And slowly, inexplicably, the emptiness began to fill. This is the pull toward the strongest version of yourself. It is not about becoming more impressive. It is about becoming more real. It is about shedding the layers of performance and pretense and getting down to the bedrock of who you are. And when you do that, something remarkable happens. You stop needing life to be a certain way in order to be okay. You stop needing everyone to approve of you. You stop measuring yourself against external yardsticks. You become, in Jung's words, an individual. And an individual is not someone who stands out from the crowd. An individual is someone who stands on their own ground. If you are feeling this pull, if you are noticing that the old games no longer interest you, if you are craving simplicity and truth and depth, do not ignore it. This is not a midlife crisis. This is the self, finally getting your attention. It is asking you to stop living someone else's life and start living your own. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to do it all at once. You just have to take the next small step toward integrity. Say the thing you have been afraid to say. Make the choice that aligns with your values even if it costs you something. Spend time alone, even if it feels uncomfortable. The pull will get stronger as you follow it. And eventually, you will look back and realize that you didn't lose anything by becoming yourself. You lost only what was never yours to carry. So here is where we land. You have walked through the pressure, the discomfort, the coincidences, the attacks, the silence, and the pull toward integrity. And if you are still here, still reading, still listening, still showing up for your own life, you have already proven something to yourself. You are not running, you are not hiding, you are not numbing, you are in the arena. The journey of the soul is not linear, it is spiral. You will revisit these phases, each time at a deeper level. The pressure will come again, but you will recognize it as preparation. The discomfort will return, but you will trust it as a compass. The coincidences will multiply, and you will greet them as guides. The attacks will arise, and you will see them as mirrors. The silence will descend, and you will rest in it as a womb. The pull will persist, and you will follow it as a thread leading you home. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you were told to be, not who you thought you should be, not who you pretended to be to keep the peace, who you truly are." And that becoming is not a destination. It is a process. It is the daily, sometimes hourly, choice to listen to the quiet voice that knows the way. If something in this video has resonated, if you have recognized yourself in these stages, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Not everyone understands this language, but the ones who do, the ones who are in the middle of their own transformation, they need to know they are not alone. They need to know that the chaos has meaning. They need to know that the silence is not abandonment. And if you want to continue walking this path with us, if you want to go deeper into the psychology of becoming, consider subscribing. This channel exists for one reason: to help you recognize the sacred architecture of your own soul. Not to tell you who to be, but to remind you that you are already becoming. And what you are becoming is exactly what the world needs. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for your willingness to grow. It is not easy, but it is everything.